As I'm recording this, the whole situation with the FAA feels kind of like a distant memory now. I'm barely even giving it any thought after yesterday's flight. I recorded some of this on the day of the flight, actually, and I must tell you my level of excitement is as high now as it was before. This was absolutely incredible on so many different levels. Although, in retrospect, after watching the whole thing, I can kind of understand now why SpaceX may have been requesting some sort of exemption under FAA policies for public safety. Not to say that anybody was in any danger during this flight, but that it did produce a hell of an explosion that could have been very dangerous to people if the ship had fallen in the wrong place. And for those of you who are wondering what the hell I'm exactly talking about, the FAA released an updated statement about their SN8 investigation. They said, quote, SpaceX sought a waiver to exceed the maximum public risk allowed by federal safety regulations. After the FAA denied the request, SpaceX proceeded with the flight. As a result of this non-compliance, the FAA required SpaceX to investigate. So that pretty much answers what happened. And it's understandable. Nobody knew at that time what SN8 was going to do, where it was going to come down, and what potential damage it might cause. So yeah, I can see, as I said, why SpaceX would have wanted to do that. But we know a lot more now. We certainly know that SpaceX has a great deal of control over the aerial flight of this rocket, which in my opinion is absolutely incredible. However, no matter how impressive the flight was, as all of us know, there's still a lot of work to be done on the landing. Now, we can't say for certain, at least not right now, as to exactly what caused this, but it appeared to be something completely different from the last time, although there was that brief green color that came in for just a second there, indicating that the fuel might have been getting consumed again. Kind of hard to say, and a lot of analysis still needs to be done. As a matter of fact, an entirely new statement might be made about it by the time there's a release of this video. But interestingly, SpaceX chose to show us the RUD from a very considerable distance. Now, that's not to suggest that they were trying to hide anything. There were a whole lot of cameras on this event, so I don't see how they could have hidden anything. However, the one thing about this particular flight that really pisses me off is that SN10 was right here. Now, I'm not going to talk about this because I think it's a minor issue and an issue that has nothing to do with the flight. I'm going to wait mostly for my closing comments to say anything about that. There's a lot of other things that need to be said about this flight, but nevertheless, I can't just ignore it. So let's get down to the actual details right now. Good evening, and welcome to yet another episode of the Angry Astronaut. So, I've released, I think, 3 videos in 4 days, something along those lines, if you take into account my live stream. I've been doing a lot of content lately, but that's simply because there's been a hell of a lot of things going on in the world of space enthusiasts, especially, of course, the SN9. Not something I've done a lot of reporting on, but something that all of us have been waiting for. Well, finally, we got it in all of its spectacular, explosive glory. And the flight itself, as with SN8, went really, really well. Once again, the aerodynamic qualities of the Starship seem to be extremely well designed. The ship handles very well in our atmosphere, and we can pretty much put it, or SpaceX rather, can pretty much put it any place that they want to. It's extremely impressive. It pretty much went right back onto the pad again. Very, very positive stuff. The landing, however, was something entirely different. If anything, it went worse than the other landing. And as I think, at least at the time of this particular shooting, the best explanation that we have at the moment is that one of the Raptors may have actually fallen out, or at the very least just didn't relight. So we had only one Raptor at the last second instead of two, which obviously would cause, a rapid unscheduled disassembly, or RUD as we like to say all the time. So that's what ended up happening, it seems, and now we need to investigate exactly why that happened, because it's hardly a surprise that the Starship would come in at the wrong angle and come in entirely too fast when it only had one engine instead of two. So there are a lot of good things about this flight, a number of bad things, and also one thing in particular that really pissed me off. So what are all of these things? Well, I'm going to get into this in detail right now. Now, I've had a long-standing relationship with Mary, or Boca Chica gal, pretty much since I started my channel, and this, in my opinion, is the most impressive launch that I have seen so far from the various camera angles that were taken of this ship. So please head over to her channel and subscribe. And by the way, I'm just going to show you a few seconds of this before I switch over to the SpaceX film so you can watch it on her channel. But still, I wanted to show you just how flawless the takeoff was and how smooth the flight was. Everything worked pretty much as SpaceX intended, right up to the belly flop and pretty much all the way back down. True to SpaceX's flight plans, the engines shut down one after another in sequence, pretty much as everything was supposed to go, although interestingly enough, they did not show us a whole lot of close-ups of the engines themselves, especially when they shut down, to show that the engines that had been shut down were gimbling about kind of wildly as they were with SN8. As to why they decided to do that, I really don't know. Perhaps for proprietary reasons, it's sort of difficult to say, or perhaps they just didn't have the camera angle right for that particular moment, or the camera stopped functioning. Anyway, they got themselves down to one engine as planned as the ship positioned itself at apogee at 10 kilometers and prepared to make its descent and to maneuver into its famous belly flop configuration. But one thing I really enjoyed about watching this is the fact that we got to see a reaction control thruster right there activate in order to push the ship into its belly flop position. These thrusters are absolutely vital to the whole descent. Some people may think that it's just the flaps that maneuver the Starship into the desired position to make sure that they land so precisely, but that's not actually the case. The reaction control thrusters are also absolutely vital to make sure that the Starship goes where they want it to go during the descent. And speaking of the descent, it is truly impressive just how precise SpaceX's control is on Starship. I mean, this is borne out by the fact that they managed to get the ship from 10 kilometers and maneuver it almost exactly to where they wanted it to maneuver in considerably less than 2 minutes. That's right, it was a lot less than 2 minutes to go 10 kilometers. The Starship practically plummeted, a lot faster than terminal velocity on Earth, about the same as terminal velocity for a skydiver if he has his head straight down. And by the way, these are my own estimates based on when the Starship hit apogee and appeared to begin to descend to the very moment of impact. I may be off by a few meters per second, but you get the idea. The Starship headed back towards Earth at a very rapid rate of speed, and that continues to be an issue for me. How are they going to get the speed down to an acceptable level in an atmosphere that's 1% as dense as ours? I still don't have an answer for that, but I'm not going to continue beating a dead horse. Let's talk a little bit about the landing, or rather the lack of a landing. As I mentioned before, the SN9 and all Starships are supposed to be landing on 2 engines. As you can see, one of those 2 engines is desperately trying to light, however, it did not do so. And I really don't care what that article had to say, an engine did not fall out of the Starship. As a matter of fact, I think the article was just speculating a little bit a few minutes after the incident actually occurred. But still, with only one engine to guide the landing, it was simply impossible. And so the ship came in at a much steeper angle than SN8 did, and the landing therefore was flat out ugly. Exactly how ugly are we talking? Well, here's SN8 coming down on 2 engines that just ran out of pressure, fuel, etc. as a result of the header tanks. Almost precisely upright, just came in too fast. And here's SN9 a millisecond before it impacted. And by the way, I pulled this shot off the web. I have no idea who took it, but I'd be happy to give you credit if you want to DM me. In any event, it's an amazing shot and congratulations, but it does give a really clear idea about just how ugly this landing is going to be if it comes in on one engine. And herein lies an uncomfortable question. Just how difficult is this flip, turn, land going to be as time goes on? Because this failure seems to have been caused by something entirely different. Perhaps not. Perhaps the header tanks are still having problems. But it does seem to have been caused by something else. And if that is indeed the case, how difficult is it going to be to get this right? I mean, this isn't exactly like a skydiver. It's more like an Acapulco cliff diver. That is to say, going from horizontal to vertical in a very short amount of time and landing vertical with an incredible amount of precision. And if Acapulco cliff divers, and I keep mispronouncing that, sorry, cannot do that with incredible precision every single time, then can we really expect the Starship to do this every single time if it has human beings on board? Granted, this is only the second test, but still, it's an uncomfortable question, at least for me. I know I'm looking way into the future here, but I tend to do that. This problem is going to be further compounded when we get to the world of orbital refueling, because tanker starships are going to have to go down to Earth and come back up multiple times, a minimum of 5 times in order to get a Starship to Mars. What's going to happen with those 5 landings? Are they going to stick them every time? Even unmanned starships may encounter some issues with this. On the other hand, we could always use 5 tanker starships, but this problem becomes further compounded when you're going to send more than 1 starship to Mars. If you send 2, do you have 10 tankers? If you send 4, do you have 20 tankers? It starts becoming a bit impractical. And this issue applies to the lunar starship as well. Keep in mind that it's actually going to take a lot more tanker refuels in order to get the lunar starship all the way to the surface of the moon and all the way back if we intend to use it as a lunar lander. And that's simply because the delta V required to get all the way from Earth to the moon and back is actually pretty similar to the amount of delta V required required to get to Mars and back. The difference is that you can't manufacture, at least as far as we know, in situ methalox on the moon. So it's going to require a lot more tanker refills. And so NASA may be watching this with great interest. Now look, I'm not sitting here and saying that all of this is impossible, that yesterday's test demonstrates that the whole flip-turn landing is something that isn't going to happen. I think it will happen. I think SpaceX is ultimately going to master this, at least well enough to carry cargo and that sort of thing. We may have to look for other solutions to land humans on Mars, perhaps have the Starship take a number of landing craft to Martian orbit and land them that way. There's a number of possibilities, but as far as transporting cargo, heavy lift, that sort of thing, there's nothing that can possibly compete with the Starship, and NASA would be foolish to ignore this. But at the same time, they need to make a decision by the end of April as to who they're going forward with as far as human landing systems are concerned. And given what's happened with the Starship thus far, they have not demonstrated, at least I don't think SpaceX has demonstrated, that they're going to have a vessel that's capable of landing and taking off again, doing the necessary refueling that's going to be required for a lunar lander. Now, that doesn't mean that the Starship can't be used for Artemis. It could be used as an orbiting refueling station, which would require a lot less delta V, and I've mentioned this a number of times in the past. But still, NASA has to make this decision by the end of April, and unless SpaceX is able to stick this landing by that time, it may be very difficult for NASA to justify going forward with Starship as a lunar lander, although they will definitely continue to support Starship in other respects. And if there's one other thing that we learned from the SN9 test, it's not to do something like this again. Not to land a Starship and have a huge explosion so close to another Starship prototype. I'm going to talk more about this in the closing, but still, even though the Starship allegedly was not damaged by this, according to The Verge, and I'm going to link this article in the description, SN10 was showered with debris. What might have happened if a piece of that debris was a bit larger than was convenient? Well, let me show you something else to demonstrate what can potentially happen with these explosions. It's amazing to think that this only happened a few months ago, and it didn't just go straight up. Just watch what happens here to the debris as it goes to the left. My God, watch it take off. Now, this was an implosion, granted, but it acts as a demonstration as to the unpredictability of debris when you're talking about a rocket explosion. But I don't want to end this on a sour note. The fact remains that the SN9 test took a very, very big step towards making what we're looking at right now a reality someday. We've had 2 tests in a row now where SpaceX has demonstrated the aerodynamic qualities of the Starship and their ability to effectively control this vessel in the atmosphere, even though, as I've said before, it's not a glider, it's not an airplane, but at the same time they can exert immense amounts of control over this ship, which was one of the most challenging aspects of the Starship, and they already have it down. But that having been said, we've got to get this landing right if we want the rest of this to become a reality. I have every confidence that that's going to happen, but it means that we're going to have to be careful, because guess what? The FAA has started yet another investigation. That's right, because of what happened with SN9, yet another FAA investigation has already been triggered, and if we're going to satisfy these guys and keep the Starship moving forward, that means we have to address everything that went wrong yesterday as much as everything that went right. So, before I do any ranting, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Overall, I thought that this was an extremely good test, especially for only the second test of this ship, at least something coming close to the full-scale version of what's going to be used in the future. In general, the test went extremely well. Once again, the Starship showed off its aerodynamic capabilities, coming down pretty much exactly where it was supposed to. Really, really impressive stuff to bring something down that obviously is not a plane, obviously is not a glider, and yet bring it down with such precision. Just using the maneuvering thrusters, the flaps, that sort of thing, beyond impressive. That having been said, this was only the second test. And we keep saying that, but I think there's one thing that we're forgetting. For some reason, which I have yet to figure out, we put SN10 in the very same area that SN9 was supposed to be landing. Not far at all. And this was only the second test. We didn't know what this thing was going to do, or SpaceX didn't. I keep saying we, obviously I have nothing to do with SpaceX, but still I regard myself as a supporter of SpaceX and what they intend to do, so I do tend to use the term we a lot, as I think all of us do. So this was only the second test. What the hell was SN10 doing there? Why put it in the line of fire? I've looked all over the net for some kind of explanation from Elon Musk or anybody else as to why this was done. Is it because we intended to launch SN10 almost immediately after SN9? Well, perhaps, but given the results of the SN9 test, and as I said in the video, it'd be pretty foolhardy to launch SN10 until we get a pretty good idea of what went wrong with the landing with SN9. I think if there's any explanation at all, it might have been to see what might things be like if we had an actual spaceport scenario, something similar to what we might be seeing on Mars, having starships taking off and landing from pads that are fairly close to one another. What would happen if we had an unsuccessful landing, an explosion of some kind? What sort of damage might be done to the other starship? That's the only logical explanation that I can think of putting SN10 so close to SN9. And as you could see from the videos, from the photographs, the explosion was uncomfortably close. And I will be shocked if there are no dents, no superficial damage whatsoever to the vessel. If there isn't, then it's just plain dumb luck, because as I showed you in the video, we've had explosions in the past that have sent very large pieces of debris over considerable distances, and any of that could have happened with this particular situation, or SN8 might not have come down where SpaceX intended. Like I said, this was only the second test, and if indeed this was the plan to kind of do a simulated spaceport kind of scenario or something, this was entirely too early to do something like that. Now, if there's another really compelling logical reason that Elon or somebody else comes up with in the future, I'll be the first to apologize publicly for even saying this if it makes a lot of sense. But currently, I think that putting SN10 in harm's way was an unwarranted gamble. Had the ship been significantly damaged or destroyed, it would have set back the program significantly. At the very least, we would have lost a ship that had been taken a great deal of man hours to complete in the first place. If we're just talking about the stainless steel, let alone anything else involved in the construction of the vessel, I have no idea how much of it was actually sitting there at the time. The Raptors weren't. As far as I know, the Raptors were taken out of harm's way, which of course is a good idea. But the rest of it, it's hard to say, and it really does irritate me. I'm almost one of the commenters on the chats, on one of the chats that I noticed, compared it to hubris. And for those of you who don't know that, it's a Greek term that simply defines arrogance, an arrogance that Greek heroes often showed before they came to a catastrophic end. And even though I'm not going to go so far as to say that this was hubris, at the same time, as I said, it was an unwarranted gamble. And I know I probably made a whole lot of people angry there, but it's what I do. I say what I think, and I'm not unconditionally pro SpaceX. There may indeed have been a very good reason for this, but currently, I don't see it. I just don't, and I hope that they don't do this again anytime soon. So, if you like a guy who isn't afraid to come out against some of Elon's decisions or SpaceX's decisions every now and then, and is willing to both praise and criticize the company and what they do, well, you know how to support me. It's all in the description. You can also, some people have asked me about this Starship, which I very much like, and I'm getting a new version of it from Spaceship Mania. Their link is in the description as well, and please use the code ANGRY10 for a 10% discount if you're interested in getting a hold of one of these. So until we're ready to move forward with SN10 rather, once again, stumbling over my conclusion here, but until we're ready to move forward with the next prototype, and also to move forward only after we've examined the failings of the last one, both the successes and the failures, to make sure that what was done right happens again, and what was done wrong does not happen again. I urge all of you to stay angry about space.